we've been talking about David as a man of passion and destiny, and that really comes out. We're borrowing the title from Chuck Swindoll's book on David with this subtitle, A Man of Passion and Destiny. And we really see that in these chapters, chapter 24, 25, and 26, his passion, both in a very positive way, a man after God's own heart, and his passion as he burns hot, in the situations of life as well. A man of passion and a man of destiny, a man that was chosen by God. We looked every time, but especially this last time, in review of the fact that David was chosen by God. He didn't sign up for this. He didn't volunteer. It was God who came and said, "This is my man." He was prepared by God. He was prepared by his successes, by his positions of prominence, and his promotions to the highest offices of the land. He was prepared for the job that God had for him by his presence in these positions. He was prepared by his failures. He was prepared by his decisions, which of course is part of the success and failure, but we're looking a little more specifically at the decisions themselves. Bad decisions, decisions that David said in retrospect was wrong, was a problem. It was a decision that I shouldn't have made. He had decided not to deal with Doeg, resulting in the death of 85 priests and the massacre of the city of Nob. We see him in good decisions where he accepted the responsibility. We see him developing as a leader, and we want to talk a little bit more about that later on, but he accepted the responsibility of the massacre. When the one survivor came to him with the unasked but question that was apparent on everyone's mind, whose fault is this? David quickly said, "It's my fault. I should have known better." He made good decisions. He spared the life of Saul, an amazing thing. Contrary to the title, a man of passion, we see him as a man of reason, a man of calculation, a spirit-led, spirit-filled man in the Old Testament sense. He spared the life of Saul. And I thought, as I mentioned last time, these were great words from Chuck Swindoll when he said, here's the guy who did the right thing and brought a whole group with him. Not did he just make the right decisions in a very difficult situation, which made that situation better, which made his life better, but it brought a whole lot, 400 or 600 eyes in the dark, right? Looking over his shoulder, watching and learning. He made some really good decisions. And that's kind of where we left off, chapter 24 and verse 7. And they've been in the cave. David has the opportunity to solve all his problems with one swipe of the sword at his side. But he rose and he left the cave, and he let Saul get away. And here's the record of him leaving. He rose, that is Saul, and he left the cave. He doesn't know anything that's going on. And afterward, David also rose, and he went out of the cave, and he called after Saul, "My Lord, the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed his face to the earth and paid homage. What an amazing scene this would have been. What an amazing place to be able to be and watch. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks you harm'?" He's speaking to the king. Now, obviously, he's in a place of power right now. But he's been wronged. He doesn't just let it go. He could have fixed it himself. He doesn't. He leaves it to his God. But he doesn't remain silent either. He doesn't remain silent. He points out that the foolishness of what Saul is doing. Why do you listen to the words of men who lie, who say, behold, David seeks your harm. Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today unto my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. David had the proper respect for the position that was established by the Lord. David was probably not real fond of the man by this point. You know, the first spear, he was like, wow, that's a pretty good shot, you know. After that, he probably lost a lot of fondness and respect for this man. But Mike, when you salute what? You salute in respect. Respect for the rank. Some say you salute the uniform, not the man inside it. You know, the position. And that was David's position. He wasn't an insurrectionist. He wasn't a Robin Hood. He was a man who was totally committed to God's people, and he saluted the king of Israel. Verse 11, see, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. The Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. What an important lesson, and we camped on this a little bit last time, but just to touch on it again. May the Lord, this is the Lord's business. This is the Lord's business. May the Lord judge. My job is to let you know you're doing wrong, and I will. I don't expect my words are going to change you. You are who you are. You're a dog worse than Doeg. You're the one who commanded him. But I'm going to tell you, but it's not my job to, your life is not my responsibility. Taking your life is not my responsibility. David had the sword of the executioner in his hand, but he was willing to leave it in the hand of the Lord. He was willing to leave Saul's fate in the hand of the Lord. He was willing to wait upon the Lord. That's what he did, and an important lesson for us. Verse 13, as the proverb of the ancients says, out of the wicked comes wickedness. But my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? To whom do you know? Is it a dog? Is it a flea? May the Lord therefore judge. May the Lord deliver me from your hand. And so we saw here in closing last time that he decided to let God be God and to do his work, to not and try and take the place of God. And verse 16, as soon as David has finished speaking these words, Saul came out, and he has a, is mea culpa the right word to use here? I never thought of that, didn't look that up, but has a real change of heart. You're more righteous than I. You're a good man. Who would do such a thing, he says, is have your enemy in your hand and not take advantage of him? I know that you surely will be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. And David swore this to Saul, and Saul went home. I'm sorry, I missed a little piece there. I think I didn't include it, but David made the request, or Saul made the request of David, promise me you're not going to wipe out all my family, which was common at the time to keep insurrections from coming. Promise me that you won't do this. And David said that he would, and we see in the chapters moving on that he kept his promise. And then Saul goes home. But David, what does he do? You know, in this particular situation, we don't know if David and Saul had a bigger conversation. But if we jump ahead a little bit to the next time this happened here, 2 chapters down the road, we have these words. When Saul said, again, after he's confronted by David, who has the spear in his hand and the water jug that he took from him the night before, he says, I have sinned. Return, my son David. Return. Come back to my house. Eat at my table. Sleep well in my bed. Right just down the hall. For I will do you no harm. These are the words of the king, the words of the head of the government. Come, David. What's his responsibility as a man of God? Interesting situation, huh? What's his responsibility? What does he do? Saul went home, and David went up to the stronghold. Nice to see you, Saul. Don't believe a word you say. Hey, how's that spear doing? Submission. Respect for the authority, yes. Stupidity, no. Don't think I'll take you up on the offer, even if it's a direct order. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to kill you. I'm not going to rebel. I'm not going to cheat on my taxes. But I don't think I'm going there. David respected Saul's position, but he wasn't stupid. He wasn't stupid. He had God's wisdom here. What else? Anything else on this? We'll start a new chapter and a new subject which makes me very angry. On anger here in just a few minutes as we see another chapter. But any comments? I only ask that because I want to finish my coffee. But all right, chapter 24, moving on. David's patience here with the king. Chapter 25, I'm sorry. Let's see. We've seen David's patience with the king, in chapter 24. We've seen an amazing display of self-control and of patience and of taking in the big picture and of seeing what God is trying to do and letting God be God. Great victory, good decisions. And now the next chapter. And we see David responding in a different way. We see him responding with terrible anger. He has had patience with the king, and now we see him exploding with anger at a fool. It's an interesting story in itself, very interesting, but especially interesting in contrast and in context. Anger is Swindoll writes it, and I think puts it well when he says, anger is one of the most debilitating emotions we wrestle with. The reason it's I think that's supposed to be debilitating and paralyzing is that it's so unpredictable. It can be on us almost before we know it. And it can wear so many different faces. Sometimes it's irritation or hurting or blurting. Sometimes it's an all-out outburst and attack. It's anger. It's an emotion. It's something that is part of the human condition. Anger. We see that coming here in the life of David. Another reason he goes on that it's so debilitating is that it's so public. You can't hide anger. It's on display. It's there for everybody to witness and to remember. And once it's out there, you need to justify it, right? And you need to make reasons for it. And you need to recruit others to your emotion. It's interesting to see here in the life of this man described as the man after God's own heart. We've seen him with amazing God-given patience. Now we see him in quite a different side of him, an explosion of anger and very nearly a dramatic stain on his life and on his ministry. It begins with another loss to David. The chapter begins. Do you see there? I don't have it written down, I don't think. Oh yeah, 25 verse 1. Samuel died. Just one more thing, and maybe we think, well, it's just a historical event, you have to throw it in there. No, the Bible is historical and historically accurate, but the historian writers of Scripture, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, include what they want to include. A whole lot of people had died. Include what they want to include to teach what they want to teach. The Bible is, first of all, a book of theology about God, of anthropology about man, about soteriology, about the salvation and the relationship between God and man. But here it's just simply Samuel died. And all of Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in the house at Ramah. It doesn't give us any clue as to the impact that had on David, but you have to think in his life, separated from his home, separated from his wife, separated from his best friend, his counselor murdered, and now the great prophet Samuel, his counselor, the one who anointed him, is dead. And the pressures of life come to us not as one big blast of wind that knock us over, but as many weights that are added, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, are they not? I often would say that stress is like carbon monoxide. With carbon monoxide, it's something in aircraft that's very critical in little airplanes, because you're in a very confined area and you're heating by taking air off of the exhaust manifold. If any of you that, I don't think anybody remember the Corvair? It's the way they heated the Corvair. I think the Volkswagens too, right? Is that the way they heat the, what's that, the Vanagon? Is that the way they heat the Vanagon? Some of them, yeah. Yeah. Not such a bad idea on an automobile, but when you're in an airplane, it's a confined thing. So you have to have a carbon monoxide, or you don't have to, but you should have a carbon monoxide tester, because it's cumulative. It builds up. It affects the way you feel. It shortens your fuse in many cases. I was just saying to Debbie the other day, we've been going through a number of things that are very happy and that are sad and that are difficult, but at the least they're stressful. And I was just saying in the morning, actually, with some calmness, I just feel like my fuse is about that long right now. You can just feel it shortening. having a short fuse is not a good idea. As a kid one time, was outside and noticed my cousin Daniel was out shooting birds with his BB gun. And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. And I got an apple and howled out the inside of it with my jackknife and got an M80 firecracker and pushed it inside of that. And I'm just imagining what it's going to look like when that apple explodes right in front of him, and the surprise that he will see and the applesauce that will appear all over him at that particular moment. And I'm so excited about that prospect that I'm holding the apple and lighting the fuse, and I accidentally light it, from my shaking almost right to the end, a very, very short fuse. And so I try to throw it very quickly and get it back about right here, and it explodes. And applesauce all over the side of my face. And I couldn't hear for about a day and a half. But, we don't know with David. Was it a short fuse problem? I'm not sure. Samuel died. One more thing. Was it coming off the high of this victory of at least temporarily pushing back the forces of Saul and confronting him and being able to say to his face the truth, even if he doesn't believe it? And now believing that you're something special? I don't know. But it's a very interesting story, but kind of a sad story as we think about it from David's standpoint. 1 Samuel 25. Then David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. Businessman. Very rich, 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Rich man. It wasn't your bank account or the amount of bitcoins, it was the amount of sheep and goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel, and now the name of this man was Nabal. Now, in English, we miss the significance of that. Nabal means fool. So, the song A Boy Named Sue, right? What was this guy's dad thinking, or mom? Let's call him stupid. Let's call him fool, Nabal. Well, Nabal might have been a fool, but he was a pretty good businessman. Pretty good businessman. And then there's Abigail, his wife. And this woman was discerning. She had wisdom and was beautiful. But this guy Nabal, he was harsh and badly behaved. He was a fool. He was harsh, yelled and screamed a lot, and he behaved very badly. He was a Caleb. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. And the story here, we'll look at the text in a moment, but the story here is that David is running from Saul. He's not on the run for days and weeks and months. It's years. And he is to be king, he knows that. He, in the fact, is in some ways acting as a king. We see that in the way he protects the people of Israel, the way he fights the enemies of Israel. But he also needs some income. And so he sets up a security firm to protect the locals. And this was not an uncommon thing. We didn't have law and order like we used to have in this country. We didn't have established rules and regulations. People just ran wild. It was the strong that won and the weak lost. And David and his men were in the wilderness, and their presence there protected the people. This wasn't a mobster approach to where you knock on the door and say, for $500 a week, I'll protect your store. And the owner responds, I haven't had any problem, I don't really need protection. To which the knocker says, you will have problems if you don't pay $500 a week for protection. We saw that a lot in Mexico. You drive in the parking lot and there's this guy out there waving his arms and, don't pay any attention to him because he's not really watching. That's just what he does, And you park the car and then he comes up to you and says, for, 500 pesos, I will watch your car. And the other half he doesn't say. For less than 500 pesos, I will puncture your tires, or whatever. Used to be a problem many, many years ago. I think that's changed now. But and the same is true here in many regards. That wasn't it. David was one who was protecting with his army, with his men. And so he does this for a long time, and there's no contract, there's no agreement. It's like when you go to a restaurant and sit down and you're done and the waitress has served you and served you well, and you leave a tip. Not required, common, expected, a courtesy. So this was the scene. So the time had come for shearing. That means payday. They gather together, and David sent 10 young men. He doesn't go himself. He doesn't send 50 guys with knives and swords. He sends 10 young men. And they go up to Carmel, and they go to Nabal, and they greet him in the name of David. And David says, say to them, peace be with you, and peace on your house, and peace to all you have. Shalom, shalom, shalom. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did no harm to them, and they were missing nothing. All of this time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, my young men, find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. It's a happy day. It's a day of celebration. Please give them whatever you have at your hand to your servants and to your son David. When David's young men came, they said this to Nabal in the name of David, and they waited. Not demanding, but giving an opportunity. In verse 10, David answered David's servants, who is David? Who is Jesse? That shepherd up there in Bethlehem with all those kids. And David, who's David? I've heard about him. He's that guy that Saul's chasing, right? He's a rebel, right? Should I take my bread and water and my meat that I have killed? I've hunted these animals for my shears, I, and give them to these men who come from I don't know where, well, Bethlehem, but we learned in this verse, we learned in earlier in verse 3 that Nabal was harsh and badly behaved. Now we learn that he's well named. Nabal. Lots of sheep and shepherds. Probably a number of shepherds with those fierce sticks with the crook on the end, and maybe a rod to go with the staff. And he's saying this to the leader of 600 of the best armed men this part of the country had ever seen. He was what his name said he was. And so David's young man turned away, and they came back and they told all this to David, and David said to his men, let's wait patiently on the Lord, right? David has already learned this from the last time, with Saul. He's learned that God will take care of this man who has disrespected us. Let's wait patiently. Does anybody have that version? He says, strap on your sword. All of you, strap on your sword. 400 fall in behind me, 200 watch the baggage. We're going to take care of this. He's not saying that to us. He's not going to disrespect you and disrespect me in that way. Strap on your swords. And that's the thing about anger and patience. Yesterday's victory doesn't mean anything today. Where did that come from? Where did that outburst, not of saying, hey, next time we're going to negotiate a better contract, or, hey, we're not protecting this guy anymore. But strap on your sword? He didn't give us a good enough tip. Strap on your sword. It's so good that this is just an Old Testament problem, right? We never suffer from this. Anger welling up, showing itself because of something. It isn't logical, like anger. It's not logical. It's emotion. It's defined by some as temporary insanity. I think I mentioned that in a few minutes. Maybe I skipped that part. But it's not logical. It's a disconnect from logic. It's the rule of emotion and response. This guy didn't tip well. 400 armed men, strap on your sword. Has anybody had a problem with stink bugs this year? Have you? It's the year of the stink bug, is it? I noticed that they're going away. Maybe this last cold snap, killed them all off. But the nice thing about stink bugs is they don't move much, And we, sitting there on the couch, and we have the living room a bit of a vaulted ceiling, and you see one up there, and it's too high to reach, and so what are you going to do? Well, I've got this little Nerf gun that I stole from my grandkids. It's got these little Nerf balls, and it's got a sight on it, and I can get really close, but I've never really hit one, But these little foam balls that shoots, it's kind of fun. But I'm always tempted to get out the double-barreled 12 gauge, just boom, boom. It would do it, right? Well, David is not pulling out the Nerf gun. He's pulling out the double-barrel 12 gauge or the AR automatic to go after this stink bug. Because this guy, this fool, is no more than a stink bug. An irritation, yes. A threat, not in your life. But David, a man of passion, and we've seen that great passion that has a heart for the Lord. And we've seen the other side of it. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent a messenger out to the wilderness to greet our master, and our master railed at him." Yet these guys were good to us. We suffered no harm, and we didn't miss anything. Yeah, we have other people that protect us, but sometimes the protection is worse than not being protected, right? These guys weren't like that. They didn't take anything. They took good care of us. They were a wall, he says. They were a wall, day and night. We were good. We could do our job. We could raise our sheep and our goats because they did their job. He says this to Abigail, "Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined." Don't you love the way that we wouldn't say it exactly this way today, would we? Of course, this is a translation. Maybe this was the normal way. Harm is determined against our master and against all his house. He is such a worthless man that we can't speak to him. Nabal, he's a fool. Everybody knows it. We know it. You know it. And harm is determined. What's he saying? He's going to wipe us out. Can you feel that vibration? You know, that's the feeling of 400 hooves coming. Notice the young man didn't go to Nabal. He knew who Nabal was. Abigail, who knew who Nabal was. He went to Nabal. So it's time to do something, and Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread. 200 loaves of bread. How many of you have 200 loaves of bread sitting around? You know, and it wasn't a matter of having it sitting around. I mean, I don't care how big your pantry is. You know, they didn't have frozen bread, but somehow she whips up 200 loaves of bread and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 sheaves of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs, and she puts them on donkeys. And she says to the young man, "You go fast and tell him I'm coming." And she does. Verse 20, she rode on the donkey, and she came down, and under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down, and she met him there. Now David had said, "Surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness." This is what he was doing. Taking care of the people of Israel. He didn't have an official position. He was just really on the run, but he was doing good where he could. And he guarded this people as he guarded many people as he fought the enemies of Israel. "Surely I have in vain guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed. All of that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good." You know, just like David's standard with Saul, "I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." His standard with his men among these people who said, "Mutton for dinner." David says, no, that's his. You don't touch it. "I needed a new horse." No, that's his. You don't touch it. David, with his integrity, protects, doesn't steal, doesn't take a little on the side. But now, what is David doing? Rehearsing the wrong that has been done to him. I mean, there he is, you know. You can feel the thunder, you know, of the horses moving, and he's at the lead, and he's like, "What am I doing, you know? Going after a flea? No, I have the right. I was wronged. Isn't that the way it is with anger, you know? I mean, if you're not careful, reason will pop out, you know, and you'll cool off. You have to kind of feed it and remind it, why am I angry again? Oh yeah, I remember. They slighted me. You know, they did. Isn't that the way it is with anger? Rehearsing the reason he was angry. Otherwise, sanity might return. He was presenting his case to the judge. Who was the judge? He was. Who was the jury? He was. Who was the executioner? Well, he had Goliath's sword strapped to his side. God, do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one man alive. What a disaster is about to take place. David, the man after God's own heart. Petty. Murderers. Anger that is seen by all. Irrational. He's about to ruin everything. But God has other plans. He used the wisdom of Abigail to confront the insanity of David. The insanity of anger, because when anger is in control, sanity is gone. The sanity of the mind, of the thinking, of the processing, of the weighing is gone. It is being controlled and led by something that isn't sane. This red-eyed monster of, whoops, that's not anger. That's, purple-eyed monster there. We'll have to make up a new one. When Abigail saw David, she hurried down. Let's look at her, this woman of great wisdom and great skill. She'd been living with a fool for a long time. She probably learned how to deal with it. And she was effective on behalf of her husband. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey, and she fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground, and she fell at his feet. She didn't come in shaking her fist saying, "What are you doing with it?" She humbled herself before him. Wisdom comes not with demands, but with humility. Wisdom comes not with force, but with an argument of what is right, what is proper, and she did that. She said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord, this worthless fellow Nabal, let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is his game." That's who he is. I know it. My servants know it. You've come down here to squash a stink bug with 400 armed men. Listen to me. I mean, David is the head of an army of 600 men. 400 are with him now. He's a man of prominence, even though an outlaw. And now one single person, this woman, who in this culture was not someone you would go to seek counsel, comes to him. This woman who is coming obviously with self-interest, right? Obviously with self-interest. Is he going to listen to her? Do you remember just a little while ago when they're in the cave? And David takes a quick survey of all the men. What should we do? And they say, and he doesn't listen. I mean, he listens, he weighs, but he doesn't take their advice. And now here's this gal who's saying, "Please listen to me. I've got something to say. There's something you need to hear. There's something you need to hear." And you see, unlike Nabal in the text where it was I, me, you see, what do we see here as she speaks? "My Lord." How many times does she say that? She asks permission to speak. She doesn't even assume that she has this right, permission to speak. Her greatest strength is her humility. To David's credit, he allows her to speak. To David's credit, he hears her. And she speaks the truth, the truth. She doesn't say, my husband, if you get to know him, he's really not a bad guy. You know, we're sorry. No, he's a fool. Everybody knows it. It's the truth. But I, your servant, did not see the young man, my Lord, whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives. David, my Lord, as the Lord God of hosts lives, and your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt, from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemies be as those who seek to do evil against Nabal. She's taking responsibility. We saw this earlier with David. She's not trying to pawn it off as being somebody else's fault, not even her husband, whose name is Fool. Not even is it his fault. It's my fault. My job as his wife is to figure out how to protect my fool. That's my job, and I failed. I didn't do it. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. I would have done something differently. And she appeals to his morality. For the Lord will certainly make verse 27. And now let this present that your servants has brought to my Lord to be given to the young men who follow the Lord. I've brought all these gifts and presents and smell of food. It's for you. It's for you and you alone. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. Please forgive my mistake. She's saying, for the Lord will certainly make your house sure. He's fighting your battles. Evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. She acknowledges that he will be king. Her husband says what? David, son of Jesse, that outlaw? Why should I give him food? She says, I see God's hand on you. I know that God is preparing you for this position. She acknowledges that he'll be king. She acknowledges that God is fighting for David. If men arise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord David shall be bound in the bundle of the living. You're going to make it. The Lord your God and the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. The enemies will be flying out just like the stone out of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, he said he's going to make you king, he will. Don't become king and have this terrible stain on your life, she says. You're going to be king. Do you want to remember this day when you take 400 men to destroy a stink bug and all the people around him? Think about the future. Begin with the end in mind. Think about what you're doing. And that's the cure for anger, is to get out of this control of this emotion and think and see the bigger picture. And that's what she's doing here with David. She challenges him to remember who he will be. She asks him to begin with the end in mind, to think about how he will feel about this in 10 years. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord and remembered your servant, think about me. An amazing response. Some really good things to go. We're out of time. Let me see, I always look at the wrong number here. Okay, yeah. But David was a good man. A man called by God, but he wasn't the God man. The God-man would come from that same little town of Bethlehem in about 1,500 years. But we learn about life and David from these words, certainly. Lord, thank you for this time, for your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Boy. The scary thing about all this is knowing how to turn it off or forgetting it off.
Walk away.
Yeah.